Next on Currents News, the president speaks out after critics blister his contentious news conference with Vladimir Putin. The very latest is next. A major development about those families separated after illegally crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. That story and what Catholic Charities is doing for them.
Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio takes a trip to the Catskill Mountains to visit the Boy Scouts of America. I'm Tim Harfman, and that story is coming up.
Plus, part of the mystery surrounding the weeping statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary has been solved. We'll tell you about Our Lady's Tears. The news starts right now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Faublas. There's major controversy tonight in official Washington after President Donald Trump's joint news conference with Vladimir Putin. Critics are saying the American appeared to side with the Russian over meddling in the 2016 election. Now the president is speaking out. Natasha Chen reports the latest.
I have full faith and support for America's great intelligence agencies, always had.
Upon returning to the U.S. from Helsinki, President Trump responded to the criticism over his press conference with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
I've said this many times. I accept our intelligence community's conclusion that Russia's meddling in the 2016 election took place. Could be other people also. There's a lot of people out there.
Their joint press conference came just days after 12 Russian nationals were indicted for interfering in the 2016 U.S. elections.
President Putin, he just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. The sentence should have been, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia. Sort of a double negative.
Trump's remarks Tuesday come after backlash from lawmakers, including many from his own party.
You could say it's embarrassing, but I don't think that does it sufficient justice. I think it undermines our moral authority. It's a real gut punch to our sovereignty.
Russia is trying to undermine democracy itself, to delegitimize democracy. So for some reason, they can look good by comparison.
But no one knows what conversations were had behind closed doors when Trump met Putin, with only translators in the room.
Words are not enough. Our Republican colleagues cannot just talk the talk.
Democrats are calling for hearings as soon as possible to learn what Trump might have promised Putin. In Washington, Natasha Chen, Currents News.
Mr. Putin appeared on Russian television after the summit and described President Trump.
He's a very skilled person. He's in the know. He listens. He accepts the arguments. On some issues, he remains in his opinion.
The Russian leader also said that while most think of President Trump as a businessman, he's a good politician because he hears what the voters expect from him. A big development about separated families who cross the U.S.-Mexico border illegally. A federal judge is ordering the government to halt all removals of the immigrants. He's acting after migrant lawyers argued mass deportations were being planned. The judge is giving the Justice Department a week to respond. At the same time, the Health and Human Services Department is saying the agency has not been able to locate the parents of 71 children. About 2,500 other families have been identified. And at Catholic Charities in San Antonio, officials are hard at work reuniting families who were separated at the border. A van carrying several children and adults was seen leaving the facility. The agency's chief executive says an estimated 400 immigrant children will rejoin their parents or relatives at Catholic Charities San Antonio in the coming days. The brutal attacks against Catholics in Nicaragua are prompting the country's bishops to plan an exorcism prayer. Paramilitary forces of President Daniel Ortega have assaulted Managua's cardinal, 3 bishops, and besieged several churches. The clergy are designating Friday as a time of prayer and fasting, and they will also pray the prayer of exorcism to Saint Michael, the archangel. Meanwhile, a priest is speaking out on the troubles facing the church in communist-ruled Cuba. Right now, Father Rolando Montes is in Rome for communications training, and he's hoping to return home soon and help build up the faith.
The church in Cuba faces difficulties. For example, it does not have a stable media presence, and it has only been gradual. Bishops have been on the radio only 2 or 3 times a year. We want the opportunity to communicate the church's activity, but now it is not recognized.
Father Rolando understands this challenge facing the church in Cuba all too well. Still, he's heartened that the church has not been discouraged by these limitations, and neither has he. These mission houses, a testament to the Cuban priests' creativity. The homes, which many embrace as domestic churches, have become a way to circumvent the communist regime's reluctance to build temples.
It is difficult because churches cannot normally be built. 3 have been inaugurated, but we've asked for many years to build churches in towns where they do not have them. In general, Cuban towns have Christian communities, with or without a church. Even strong Christian communities without a church still receive formation, the Eucharist, and other sacraments from under a mango tree or in similar places.
While the relationship between the church and the communist government is showing signs of improvement, Father Rolando admits there's still a long road ahead.
There's freedom of worship, but religious freedom requires more. We still have a long way to go. I wouldn't say there's none, but I wouldn't say there's a lot. We are still developing, and there's still a long way to go to achieve religious freedom.
Father Rolando is certain the Catholic faith will prevail in Cuba. He says the people are deeply religious and their roots in God have endured despite 6 decades of atheist Marxism. The editor of Nuestra Voz, Jorge Dominguez, is a renowned expert on Cuba and especially the Catholic faith in the country, and he joins us now. Jorge, always a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to getting your insight on this. Having listened to Father Rolando, does the church stand on more steady ground under Cuba's new president, Miguel Diaz-Canel?
It's hard to tell, Liz. The new president at the beginning, he's not going to have a lot of space to maneuver because he has to make the old guard happy. The second thing is, recently in Cuba, there are 2 things that were very disappointing. One is they came out with new bylaws about artists and artistic activities in the island, and they are very, very restrictive. Like anything that you do in the any artist do, and it's not controlled by the state, could be considered a crime, things like that. On the second hand, the new president, Diaz-Canel, he made a speech this week in the Congress of Cuban Journalists, and it was a depressing speech to hear, in the sense that he was asking for obedience more than anything else. So in that sense, I don't think that in the immediate future, the Catholic Church is going to have more space in Cuba.
Now, it seems, though, that the bishops are not deterred. They are still using their voice. They're speaking out strongly in support of the beleaguered church in Nicaragua. Now, what are they saying about that violence?
It is very interesting, the bishop's declaration after the latest events in Nicaragua. They say that they were contemplating the attacks on the bishops with sadness, profound sadness and horror. Those are very strong
powerful words. Yes.
So they went all out, in solidarity with the bishops in Nicaragua, because they know better than anybody how they feel in Nicaragua right now. Now, the problem here is that, as Father Montes was saying, the bishops have access to the media just when the state, which controls all the media in Cuba, authorize the bishop to speak on the radio or on TV. Whenever you do a declaration, of course, this declaration of the bishops was just a communique. That was not on the radio or on the TV. But whenever you do something like that, your right to access the radio or TV can be taken away immediately. So, as long as we don't have the right to have access to the media, access to the media is just a reward that the government gives you for good behavior.
For good behavior. Jorge, this is something we've said many times. Francis is our first Latin American bishop. Pope, that is. He visited Cuba. And what steps could he take to address the unrest?
The unrest in Nicaragua, you mean?
Nicaragua, yes.
Well, the first thing is what he has done, mentioning the problems in Nicaragua and making clear that the Vatican is with the bishops. Because historically in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas, some part of the church, especially some priests, were very close to the Sandinistas. By the way, they are not any longer, but some priests were very close to the Sandinistas. And the usual technique is to say that Christians or Catholics are with the Sandinista government. It's just the bishops who are against. So the Pope is making clear that the Vatican is with the church in Nicaragua and is opposing the violence against the people.
All right, Jorge, thank you. Great perspective as always. I appreciate your insight. Thank you very much. The Bishop of Brooklyn, Nicholas DiMarzio, is a champion of the Boy Scouts. And today, he's with them for Mass and a get-together at the 10-Mile River Camp in upstate New York. Currents News' Tim Harfman is standing by with them. Tim.
Liz, over 700 boys from troops in Brooklyn and Queens spend part of their summers here, nearly 120 miles from home. As they continue to learn life skills, today they're also strengthening their faith with the bishop, who is no stranger to the outdoors. On this Taco Tuesday, the Boy Scouts have a special guest at lunch. Bishop DiMarzio spends time with the boys, who are at the 10-Mile River Camp learning life lessons.
All 12 points of the Scout Law: trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent.
We play sports in the backfield, we go swimming, we catch fish.
The weather couldn't dampen the bishop's visit. For him, being at camp brings back childhood memories. Growing up a scout himself, the bishop earned the second highest honor, a ranking known as life, right before he entered the seminary.
The best part is when I was a leader in the troop, you really learn how to listen to people, motivate them, keep them going.
For the Scouts, they appreciate the bishop traveling from the Brooklyn Diocese to be with them.
Seeing the bishop here is inspiring for other kids because, he brings a lot. He brings a lot to the Brooklyn Queens community.
It's such a big honor. The bishop, I know it's a really high position in the church, so it's great that he's able to come here.
Bishop DiMarzio also celebrates Mass. The young people realize that they're not only gaining life lessons while at camp, they're also strengthening their faith.
A lot of what the Boy Scouts teaches is treating others fairly and kindly and with courtesy, and that's definitely the teachings of the Catholic faith.
Boy Scouts, you always have to believe someone higher than you, and that's God.
One camp official tells me the diocese is the largest sponsor of the Boy Scouts in Brooklyn and Queens, with nearly 80 churches hosting a troop in their parishes. At 10-Mile River Camp in the Catskills Mountain, Tim Harfman, Currents News. Liz, back to you in Brooklyn.
All right, Tim, thank you so much for that report. There's a lot more news headed your way. More from Vladimir Putin. You'll hear him say who he thinks Russian hackers are most like. And an urgent plea from bishops to halt fast-track executions in Tennessee. And I'll report on a death row inmate and what he's telling children from his family's church. And do you have a story idea? Something happening in your parish we should know about? We want to hear from you. So please keep this email handy. News tips at desalesmedia.org. We'll be right back. More now on tonight's top story. Vladimir Putin is admitting that the secret agents indicted for trying to hack and disrupt U.S. elections did work for Russia, but he's describing them in an unusual way.
Hackers are free-spirited people, like artists. If they are in a good mood in the morning, they wake up and paint. It is the same for hackers. They wake up today, they read that something is happening in the interstate relations, and if they are patriotically minded, they start making their contributions.
The charges against the hacking spies may be pulling back the veil on the secret operations that the Russian government has staged against the U.S., and Brian Todd has that report.
Robert Mueller's indictment of 12 Russian military intelligence officers reveals startling details on how Putin's spy network could have been penetrated by U.S. intelligence.
Putin, being a former intelligence officer himself, of course, will not look kindly upon the fact that his officers were caught, the GRU officers were caught.
The indictment includes specific details of the Russian spies: names, unit numbers, titles, street addresses where they worked. The indictment reveals one of the 12 spies, Sergei Alexandrovich Morgachev, a lieutenant colonel, oversaw a department within Unit 26165, dedicated to developing and managing malware, including a hacking tool used by the GRU known as X-Agent.
The detail about who and when and where they developed this tool for use is very significant and something that we very rarely see from these types of reports, whether they're coming out of government or from the private sector.
The indictment identifies another hacking tool called X-Tunnel. It pinpoints specific dates and times of the Russian hacks, how they used Bitcoin to pay for things like servers, something they thought would hide their tracks. American investigators even knew what the Russians were Googling, identifying specific search terms. Intelligence experts say Putin is now doing a damage assessment to figure out how the Americans infiltrated his spy networks. Putin will likely learn from this, they say, and come back at the U.S.
They seem to have gotten a lot of bang for the buck. The mayhem, really, that has been visited upon our democratic system because of what Putin and the Russians did for our 2016 presidential elections, it's hard to imagine that they're not going to give it a shot again in 2018.
Another incentive for Putin to interfere with the upcoming elections, according to analysts, there were few repercussions stemming from the 2016 hacks. The bishops of Tennessee are making a stand for the sanctity of life, calling on the state's Governor Bill Haslam to halt upcoming lethal injections. The executions are on a so-called fast track before the death penalty drugs expire. An inmate is scheduled to die next month. Billy Eric would be the first to be executed in Tennessee since 2009. A Texas man may soon pay the ultimate price for a capital crime he committed 14 years ago. These days, as he awaits execution, he uses the time he has left to mentor wayward teens and reflect on his mortality.
There's times where I can actually just be sitting there, maybe typing a letter and feel the needles in my veins.
A vivid image from a 34-year-old man who realizes his future is uncertain.
I just found out before I came out here that the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has denied my case.
Christopher Young is a death row inmate. He's scheduled to die by a lethal injection. Certainly not the life he ever envisioned for himself growing up.
I was considered a nerd. You know, I played 4 instruments. Played violin, viola, the bass, the cello.
But the East Side native says after his father died, he began a life of drug and alcohol abuse and gang violence.
I embraced the roughness, looking for a name for myself.
And he did just that, making a name for himself in the Texas legal system, now known for killing a man during a robbery in 2004.
But because of me being drunk, and it just turned into a robbery. And so I didn't mean, I wasn't even trying to kill an individual. I wasn't trying to kill Hash that day, and it just happened.
Now he's often visited by family, including his aunt, who brings kids from her church. Young uses the opportunity to mentor them.
Till I'm gone, this is going to be done. That's why I have the hope.
Hope they won't follow in his footsteps.
It's all psychological. They got to really feel comfortable in themselves. You got to help them get rid of their insecurities. You got to help them get rid of their complexes. You got to help them get rid of their materialism.
But most of all, he wants lawmakers to understand the factors that contribute to youth ending up like him.
The East Side shouldn't be like it is at all. You know, it shouldn't be impoverished like it was.
Still, Young says he's not making excuses for the choices he's made, and in the end knows he must accept the consequences.
The only way to triumph over death is making your life a masterpiece.
Young chose not to reflect on what his last words would be during the final moments of his life, saying he prefers to share a spontaneous message from the heart. His attorneys maintain race played a role in the court's decision to deny clemency. Still to come on Currents News, a breakthrough in the mystery of the Weeping Blessed Virgin Mary statue. We'll tell you what we know. And the pop star Katy Perry is crediting Pope Francis with causing a big change in her life. We'll be right back. Tonight, we know more about the mystery surrounding the Weeping Blessed Virgin Mary statue in New Mexico. The tears are composed of a scented olive oil, but what remains unknown is where the oil is coming from. We recently told you about the investigation. The statue stands at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church in Hobbs. The bishop of the diocese, Oscar Cantu, is saying the probe into the phenomenon is continuing to determine if a miracle has occurred. And here's a welcome wedding crasher in Rome. The Holy Father, Pope Francis, surprising guests when he unexpectedly officiated a wedding. The groom, Luca Schaefer, is a member of the Pontiff's Swiss Guard, and the bride, Leticia Vieira, is a former employee of the Vatican Museums. And his advice to them, remember 3 actions: to begin, to stop, and to resume the journey, which he explained are needed to live marriage in fullness. Pop star Katy Perry's encounter with the Pope made a huge impact on her life. The singer went to Rome last April to attend a Vatican health conference and ended up meeting the Holy Father. Now, she says she's not only a big fan of Pope Francis, but she has returned to her Christian faith. The singer has praised Pope Francis for connecting the church with the people, calling him, quote, a rebel for Jesus. New dangers from Hawaii's Kilauea volcano. A lava bomb has smashed into a tour boat. A flying chunk of molten rock ripping through the roof of the vessel. 23 passengers were injured from the explosion, more than half of them taken to the hospital for treatment. A camera was recording when the lava bomb struck.
There's a few big chunks that was on the roof, and we could see chunks laying all over the side of the boat and on the floor of the boat.
Only one passenger is reported to be in serious condition, a young woman whose injuries include a broken femur. The Kilauea volcano has been erupting for over 2 months. Finally, tonight is when baseball's All-Star Game will be played in Washington, D.C. The history of the game tracks much of America's story, and a new exhibit at the Library of Congress in the nation's capital shows the similarities. Karen Kaifa reports.
The last time Washington hosted an MLB All-Star Game was 1969, and the rosters included future Hall of Famers Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, and Ernie Banks. Now those names are part of an exhibition at the Library of Congress that looks at baseball's endurance and evolution, narratives that now span decades.
The story that we selected was baseball as community, as an equalizer, as something that brings people together. And then it was easy to say, what are the stories we want to tell?
Dozens of baseball artifacts, photos, and game footage create the experience. Some items are from the Library of Congress collection, others on loan from the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown, New York, like Babe Ruth's leather cleats. But Librarian of Congress Carla Hayden said it was important to look beyond the play on the field to how the game has reflected life off of the field.
Of course, when you think about diversity and baseball bringing people together, you think about Jackie Robinson being the first African-American player.
The Library of Congress collection holds Jackie Robinson's papers and the papers of Branch Rickey, the baseball executive who helped him break that barrier with the then Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947. Also part of the exhibition, women in the game, including a uniform from the Rockford Peaches, the team made famous in the film A League of Their Own. Hayden, a baseball fan herself, hopes the sights and sounds of the space spark memories and conversations across generations.
It's going to take you right back to when you were at the ballpark or you were at home and listening to a game on the radio. And that's what we hope that people will feel.
No matter how long ago or not so long ago those memories may be. In Washington, Karen Kaifa, Currents News.
That is Currents News. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Liz Faublas. Set your DVR to record this program so you never miss it, because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.